is great to have this opportunity to talk to David. So I'm going to start with questions that come from all sides. Okay? So my very first question comes from Juan. He's a video game student. He might be around here. And he sent me this question. He said, 2 days ago, I think, he wants to ask, what did motivate you to start 30 years ago? Because at that time, the industry wasn't that developed as it is today.
Well, that made it an amazing opportunity. You know, it was very amateurish then, and it's become a lot more mature now. But I mean, thanks for your lovely intro. The common factor, I would think, between all those things is I love sort of trying to do things differently. And procedural generation, in my sense, when I first looked at ways of essentially not storing data, it felt like cheating. It felt like one of those wonderful tricks you discover, and a lot of people sort of out there are right now discovering ways of making something either appear richer, easy to do from a programming point of view, or just another way of looking at it, like we do with Raspberry Pi. I mean, the thing with all of these things is we've come up with solutions that are very different to the solutions that other people were using, which made it easier and cheaper and quicker to do. You know, with Raspberry Pi, we've undercut people by several orders of magnitude in price, and yet get things like you're suggesting are just as powerful. And through errors of, I mean, pieces of luck almost, with Raspberry Pi, we looked at ways, just a very technical interlude, we use something called a package on package, where two packages go together. So the RAM actually is part of the processor, which meant that the device doesn't radiate very much. One of the big problems with computers is you need cases to stop the radiation. So with luck, we actually qualified for the emissions regulation.
I'm going to connect what you were just saying, because you mentioned some stuff regarding the Raspberry Pi. There's another video game student, he's called Victor Navarro, and he sends this question. He says, because you are behind the great Raspberry Pi, which one is the role of the new and emerging technologies in the future of education?
Not quite understand the question. There were 6 of us that founded the Raspberry Pi Foundation, and we were trying to solve a problem in education. And that problem is all computers, at least from an educational point of view, are quite heavily locked down. And so from a teaching point of view, or trying to get kids to play with innovative software, I remember meeting a teacher who'd written this really great package to teach students with, and was giving it to another teacher, and he couldn't get it to work on their school computers, partly because it was on a different version of the compiler, there was a different version of Windows they were running on, and lots of little driver-level tweaks were needed to make it work. And that was sufficiently frustrating that he couldn't spread it out around. And initially with Raspberry Pi, we did think about doing it as a software package, software only, sort of like emulation that would run on a PC. But then that puts up so many other barriers, because very quickly you start hitting with antiviruses and things like that actually are designed to stop some of the fun things like networking that Raspberry Pi people are doing right now out there in the world. So we actually thought that doing a piece of hardware, making a piece of hardware, the barriers were lower than trying to overcome the other barriers.
So my next question goes back to Elite. We have Andrzej Marcewski. He's from England, from your country, and he's a gamification practitioner.
Oh yeah.
So he's doing a lot of stuff in the corporate world with gamification, but he's also a gamer, and you know, we both played with Commodore and Amstrad and Sinclair Spectrum and all that, and maybe Acorn and BBC Micro and all that. So he says, what inspired you to create a game of that scale?
I really wanted to do a space game, and in fact one of the first pieces of software I wrote was in BASIC on an Acorn Atom, was an expanding stars field, and it went really, really slowly. You sort of see it draw the stars, and it would draw them in a different position, and it was rubbish. And that inspired me to write machine code. But I was also very interested in astronomy, and I wanted something that would get across the idea that the galaxy is really big. And I think it was a side effect, the fact that we had so little memory, I wanted to store things efficiently, so started looking at compression and all sorts of things then, which was very new even then. But then thought, wait a second, if we generate it on the fly, you can store as, so the very original Leap, before it was ever released, had 2 to the 48 galaxies, which is very, very, very silly. We reduced that to 8. But the point being is that actually the question was, why did we make it as small as we did rather than as big as we did?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. So that one comes from me. Did you play any wireframe 3D graphics video game before releasing yours?
Yes, the only one I saw was a game called Battlezone, running on the Atari cabinet.
Yeah.
At that stage, I'd already done, the 3D graphics for Elite were already done, so I was a bit disappointed. I thought, oh no, someone else has done it. But they were cheating, to be fair, a little bit, because they were using a vector display. For those of you who don't know, this goes back to the days of the tube TV. They were designed so that you could actually drive the ray of the TV around. There was also Asteroids, was used a very similar technology at the time, also from Atari, which is nothing to do with the Atari today, of course. That was the original Atari with Nolan Bushnell. But it was great, although actually it wasn't a properly 3D game, because it was confined to a 2D plane. And I met some of the people later who'd written it, and of course there was no hidden line remover or anything, but it was lovely. Mm-hmm. So that was the only time that I think don't think I saw any, before we started writing the 3D, I didn't see any 3D games. So Battlezone I saw whilst we were writing it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good reference. So we have another question that comes from Jordi. I believe he's sitting around, and he says, I played Elite as a kid, and I must say that it was sort of difficult for me to onboard. I have a question that addresses the UI, because I felt like inside a movie. So the question is, where did you get the inspiration for the 3D radar from?
A sort of embarrassing confession, which is the first Elite didn't have the 3D radar until very, very late in the day. And I was looking at how to make a sequel better, and came up with the idea. I was thinking, well, all right, you really want one display. We actually had 2 displays to start with, which showed a view from the left and a view from above. And it was really confusing. You end up your eyes looking in different directions, trying to correlate the 2. And I thought, oh, I know, I'll try. I had this idea, which was the scanner we've got, and played around with it. And I mentioned it to Ian. He said, oh, it's too good to be true, let's try it. And we tried it. Mm-hmm. And the game was so much easier to play. So we showed it to Acorn, who were both interested and horrified that we were messing with the code so late in the day. And this is the reason that the manual for the Acorn version of Elite doesn't have any scanner in the bottom. Mm-hmm. It was cut off because we'd already done the screenshots for the manual. Because in those days it took a long time to prepare. You had to prepare what were called bromides, negatives for printing the manual. Mm-hmm. And so it had already been done. So that created a lot of work. But it was because it was so much better. I mean, the idea was just simply came from, all right, how in an ideal world, how would you represent a 3D thing? And it's just doing I think the trick was just drawing the lines from where the objects were to your plane of reference, not doing it in an absolute way, but doing it in a relative way.
Mm-hmm. No, interesting. So Teresa, she's a professor. She has an artistical background. She's teaching in a video game school. In fact, she's teaching here at ENTI-UB video game school. She says, a black background with millions of white points seems like a feasible pattern to induce a sensation of infinite space. When looking to the latest sequels of your game, the colors seem to evolve to warmer tones. It's like we may think that space should be like cold and blue, but the last versions of Elite, like Dangerous, look more warm and red. She says.
Yes.
And she's like, why?
Realism. So with Elite Dangerous, rather than just drawing a backdrop for the sky, every single star you see in the sky in Elite Dangerous is a real star that you can visit. And the backdrop isn't drawn by an artist. The whole galaxy is actually being plotted by the machine. So what that means is the colours and all of that sort of thing came from the fact that the colours need to match the night sky. And in the night sky that gives the Milky Way the look it has, there's an awful lot of intervening dust, and the intervening dust tends to make the light slightly more brown yellow. And it's blue in some places, so the stars up close can look quite blue, but a lot of the distant ones, also because the majority of the stars are actually quite dim and quite red, they give the colour. We've tried to make the colour as accurate as we can.
Yeah, interesting. She will love this answer because she was like, she's an artist, and she wanted to know the reason for that. So,
hi, I just wanted to ask, what was your experience from the Elite Dangerous Kickstarter? Because it was a huge success, and that's not that common on Kickstarters. I think a lot of people, fans from the previous Elite, were excited about this project.
I think Kickstarter is, it was obviously successful for us, and I think one of the things that we did is we placed the target level for funding very high. I think for games we may still be close to the highest ask, not the amount we achieve, but the amount we say is the minimum of any Kickstarter. I mean, I know with the pound changing lately, I think that's not the case anymore, because I think one of the dollar ones is higher. But the point being is we were quite realistic, and I think there is a temptation with Kickstarter and a danger where people pitch the amount they ask for quite low, just to make sure that they do pass it, and then find that they don't have enough to be able to do what they wanted to do. For us, actually, the biggest success wasn't so much Kickstarter, it was our own site. And we raised a lot more by the time we actually shipped the game, a lot more through our own site than we did through Kickstarter anyway. I think the key thing with crowdfunding is to engage with people and to be, we were very open, we showed the progress. And one of the funny things with our Kickstarter is we had a criticism in the first week or so that we didn't have enough content to show. And the whole point with a Kickstarter is you're trying to kickstart development, so necessarily we didn't. Towards the end of the Kickstarter, because ours was 60 days, we did have a lot more content to show, and people were a lot happier. But what was interesting is that criticism sort of implies people are already, even back then, right at the start of Kickstarter, had assumed that we would have more at the start, that it's more of a sales process than it is of a genuine kickstarting a game process. And I think this is a problem. I think Kickstarter has changed and people's impressions of it has changed. And I think together with that, we've seen some conspicuous failures which don't really help people's confidence in it. I think as an industry what we've got to do is really take seriously when we say we'll deliver something, and roughly when we'll deliver it, really take that seriously. Otherwise we'll have tight regulation. So my plea to people out here thinking about Kickstartering actually is don't set your minimum to be ridiculously low. Set it to be something where if you think, well, all right, if we got that amount of money, are we able to do what we've said? And that should be the absolute test, and be realistic about it, and don't start adding T-shirts and things like that to it, because one of the problems with T-shirts is not actually the cost of the T-shirt, it's getting it to Australia, to America and things like that, and you'll probably find that's more than the cost of the T-shirt in the first place. But anyway, Kickstarter's great, don't get me wrong, just be careful and think carefully about it. Thank you.
Thank you. I must admit that I brought 2 T-shirts for you. I will give them to you. One for you, one for your wife, when we finish the presentation. But it will be much more easier because we are together, and then we don't need the shipping. Okay, so we have another question coming from Carlos Coronado. Carlos Coronado, he's a developer. He does augmented reality and virtual reality stuff. He's playing with HTC Vive. He's playing a lot with Samsung Gear, Oculus Rift, and all that. He's in fact one of the kiosks outside. He's showing like quite nice demos there. I believe that he has like one of the most downloaded demos at the Samsung Gear shop, like more than 100,000 downloads, if I'm not wrong. And you have to pay for it, so it's a good thing because it has good quality. And he has this question for you. He says, there are games similar to LET nowadays. What is it that you don't like about them? Is there anything wrong on them? This is like a tricky question.
It is. I'm not quite sure what games he's looking for. I think the obvious one would be the Eve Valkyrie game, where they've got a feeling of the arena combat, which is nothing like the main Elite game, but is a little bit like Elite Arena game. But I think it's great. I think it's like with any. I'm a huge fan of games, and I think it's good to see beautiful implementations of things. I'm very, very proud of what the team have done with Elite Dangerous, don't get me wrong. I think when there are too many, there are lots of different ways of doing things, and when someone comes at something with a very different approach, I think that's really great. I think it's good to see. It's good to see. I mean, Call of Duty. There's they're coming into space. Welcome them. It'll be fun. A very different take. Very much more sort of run and gun. But I think that's great. That's exciting.
Sure. Yeah, there are lots of opportunities. So let me change this one with another one that has some sort of relation with it. That one comes from Òscar Garcia. He's a journalist on video games at a quite well-known newspaper, La Vanguardia, and he says, what do you feel when there's people surprised about current titles like No Man's Sky?
I think that looks interesting, and again, they're taking quite a different take. It's a slightly cartoony view of worlds, and it's fun. Good luck to them.
When building the Elite Dangerous massive universe, what were the technical problems with servers and capacity?
So what were the problems?
The technical problem.
I think it was the first time we'd gone so big on a server-based game. I think the technical problems come when you have a problem on a server, load problem. A load problem can very quickly get out of hand, and so making sure everything's buffered and all that sort of thing. What was, we were really lucky, I mean we planned it this way, but we had an alpha and a beta, so we gradually scaled capacity through that time. I mean people did criticise us somewhat for the price of our alpha, but what it did is it meant we only had around 3,000 people playing, which was quite good because it meant we could tune that capacity. And then when we went into the premium beta, we went up quite a lot. And from memory, it was about 30,000 people, that sort of level. So a factor of 10 in capacity. And then again, another factor of 10 when we went into beta. But that was really useful because it helped us flesh out a lot of the automated things. I mean, what people possibly don't realise is the servers are spread around the world, firstly. But also they automatically scale up. So as soon as one server reaches a particular capacity, it starts firing up other servers automatically. And it's trying to tune the constants for that process, because what tends to happen is sometimes the leading edge of the curve is actually very steep. So it was tuning those parameters we did through the beta, because particularly in the evening, when Europe starts to come online, then when America starts to come online, that's when we see our peak, and most often on Friday evenings and Saturday evenings is the biggest times. And sort of how we deal with those and making sure that the servers have a bit of headroom. And there are a lot of other things to do with individual connections, which we got better at through the alpha and the beta. That how people are in the same session. So the game does a lot of what we think of as quality of service measures, how quickly it responds. And it's often due to individual people's PC speeds, network connections, and all that sort of thing. So it tries to group people in sensible groups. And so that's why some people have queried whether we actually have a maximum number in a session, because we've seen people going up to about 100 in an instance. And it's because the system dynamically tunes, depending on, because one of the things with a game like Elite, it's not just the number of players, it's also the number of non-player characters is relevant. So there has to be headroom. So for example, if there is a non-player character chasing you, there's got to be room in a session for that character to be able to join. Which is why some of the really big sessions we've seen on do you know the Distant Worlds exhibition? Where people have headed off into the galaxy, and that means there are no non-player characters, so that you end up with much higher numbers. But overall, it's the sort of problems we had is if there is a server overload, if there's a data problem which causes one of the servers to stutter, that can end up, capacity can end up mounting up then. And that's caused by some of the sort of more conspicuous failures. Now, interestingly, during the beta, we got the numbers, when the number was high, we actually intentionally reduced the number of servers just to see what edge cases started to happen. And that was incredibly useful because we detected quite a number of conditions that hadn't happened before. Once we had, rather than tens of thousands of people playing, hundreds of thousands, we end up with a lot more people, and therefore, you know, the people say, oh, the chances of that happening are 1,000,000 to 1. You think, well, actually, that happens, you know, every few seconds that happens. You know, it's those sort of things where you start having to realise that actually these events all coinciding is going to happen quite a lot.
Ruth, she's a game designer, she's an academic, she has a PhD, she's like teaching at several universities, she runs her own company, she does serious games, and she's asking this. I know developers who say that they don't go on their Steam forums because they are just so full of anger and there's sometimes nothing that the developer can do to help. So the question is, as a developer, do you visit forums?
I do regularly, and you've got to have a thick skin, and I think it's more of a case of the way the internet works. You know, there's a lot of positivity on the internet, there's a lot of negativity, and there are people who take joy in negativity quite often because you see them posting on different forums and all that sort of thing. And it's not tied to any one game. You know, you go looking at other game forums and you see that there are people spouting thoughts, negative comments on a game. And they clearly know a lot about the game, and it applies to our game as well. And I'm not meaning to belittle it, because often it means people really care dearly about it, and there is something that isn't quite right for them. And often as a developer, you know it's not right. You know, we've taken flack over many things in the past, and we do our best to fix it. And I think the key thing is we do listen to people. But, you know, that overall, obviously it's nice to see positivity, but overall, just to make sure people are getting the game experience they want as best we can deliver it. You know, this is the problem. When you've got hundreds of thousands, millions of players, and you're going to have hundreds of thousands, if not millions of opinions on things, you know, in terms of how hard things are, how much help you give the player. You know, and in many ways, you can't actually give them enough help, and we can be quite bad at that sort of thing. And again, it depends who you're targeting in a game. But overall, I think forums are damaging, not so much to the people on there because they've got used to it, it's to new people who come along. They'll come along and see a hate-filled forum for what is actually a great game. You know, I'm not talking about our games now. You just go in and look and you go, oh, why are they being so negative? And when you dig, it will turn out to be some small thing that's changed that the fans don't like, and so are, you know, downvoting.
I know that, you know, I would love if you could explain us a little bit about The Dark Wheel.
Oh, yeah.
That was the novel, right, by Robert Holstock.
That's right.
And because there's, you know, a significant amount of people talking about transmedia, right? Transmedia storytelling and the content here and there. And I might begin with a social network, and I might jump to a comic, and then I might play a little bit, and then I have like this, I don't know, web doc series and all that. You know, it was truly innovative, you know, like 30 years ago, to make a game that would come with a novel, right? You were doing transmedia stuff, we might say. So what can you tell us about that?
Well, and so with the manual to the game as well. It was great working with Rob Holstock, because he was a real up-and-coming author at the time and went on to write some really good books, things like Mathago Wood, and also books under different pseudonyms. I had hoped he would write another book with us for Elite Dangerous, but I don't know if you know, he died.
Oh, didn't know.
Not that long ago. Quite suddenly. It was a real shame. But anyway, I got on well with him. He's a really nice guy. And but yes, to go on to the transmedia side of things, I mean, I think it's fascinating. I think we're all here. We're part of a much bigger industry than perhaps we realise. We're part of the entertainment industry, and that's what people are starting to realise. You know, if you look at the screen time we've taken from TV and from film, which is now playing games, you know, we're the biggest of the entertainment industry sectors. And that, you know, you saw the talk a couple of talks ago from Activision, looking at esports and things like that, looking at how influential electronic gaming is. overall, that it does present these opportunities. You look at how people get vested in our storylines with an elite, backing particular characters, overthrowing governments and all that sort of thing. There is a story that people are participating in. We're probably the first story-based game where we've got 1 million plus players participating in that story.
I think that we can connect with that question that comes from Carlos Camaño. He's studying a gamification and transmedia storytelling master program. And he says, when and how will we see games more integrated into real companies? What do you think about that?
Well, I would claim Frontier is a real company, and games are integrated into it. I suspect that's not quite the focus.
Yeah, I think that he means, the corporate world, we have like bank agency, we have like banking, we have like human resources, we have like advertisement, we have like marketing, we have like all sorts of companies where there are some, let's say, challenges that we need to face, right? Even either internally or externally. So I have challenges with my customers, or I have challenges to address with my employees, my collaborators. So could we use more games? Could we use more? Because he's studying gamification, right? So
it's already happening in lots of different ways and at different levels. So about 10 years ago, we did a project with a big merchant bank who came to us about simulation and how you forecast for all sorts of corporate things, pensions, corporate takeovers and things like that. So we did a project with them using our simulation technology, and it worked. It was great. You go into a supermarket in most European countries, and actually most countries, and you have loyalty card schemes. Most of them are run through gamification type techniques. There is a big supermarket chain in the UK called Tesco, for example, and the reward card, they send you things through the post depending on, say, you haven't bought this for a while, or if you buy 3 of those, you can get an extra one. And that is very tailored. That's gamification at a very shallow level. And so there are a lot of changes in, coming and existing, that where we're going spreading, and where even transmedia and gamification meet. We saw the esports talk a while ago, but also if you look at some of Microsoft's experiments, if you saw the 1 versus 100 quiz show, I thought that was very clever, where playing on a Kinect at any time, you have the potential of being in the studio in a minute's time. And I thought that was very interesting, very clever, where you have a non-interactive medium mixing with an interactive medium in real time in a way that really, really does blur the boundaries. I think that's fascinating. Same with ESPN and Sky in the US. ESPN did a deal where on Xbox you could watch any ESPN sport for free. And you could, using your Kinect, you could be sort of virtually in the same room as other people, all watching the same sports show. Because in the US, it's a major issue that, I suppose we see it with Europe to an extent, where people who grew up together no longer live in the same cities, but still want to watch the ball game together. It's that sort of thing, and Sky TV did something similar in the UK. Apologies, I don't know what deals were done in Spain, but what was interesting that I heard is that Sky Sports, that some very high percentage, I think it was 80% of Sky Sports was watched through an Xbox. In that, so it really was successful. And I think it's interesting because that's where you get soft interactivity, you get mild gamification in something that people are already doing, like with the supermarkets. And I think there are a lot of other projects to come where gamification has become a big thing, and how you do it. There are lots of barriers to doing it as well, because most European countries have quite tight gambling legislation. You've got to make sure what you're doing doesn't constitute gambling. But having said that, gamification is appearing in all sorts of strange places.
Yeah, well, it's good to see, all these nice examples that you were providing, that it's out there and it doesn't need to be explicit to be there. At the end, it's like, you're offered a memorable experience, let's say, and then it flows and it happens. And maybe you don't really know why. Maybe you're not, let's say, a true hardcore gamer, but, it feels good, and it feels good because at the end it has like some game elements behind, and then it works. And at the same time, you were talking about like sharing, let's say, sharing the platform, sharing the moment, which is cool because at the end it's like one door to a transmedia world, and I might like to traverse this door because I'm used to this console, and at the same time you're using another thing, another device, because it's your door, but we can, let's say, encounter together. So yeah, really interesting. Okay, do we have another question from the audience? I've been asking for a while. I think that we have one hand here. Thank you.
Hi, I would like to put your question. Vincent Cerf the other day speaks in a place that Òscar knows very well, who is La Salle, about the loss of the format and the danger to lose some formats. Video games now has story, and a story with very interesting works that may be lost for next generations, because we are producing products that, because technology evolves, doesn't read themselves. What do you think about that? In your perspective, from the educational side, what do you think it may be done with this?
I think looking at I guess what you're pitching for is media that becomes obsolete. So there are several levels to it. There's a computing museum in Cambridge which is trying to preserve the older technologies. I think when you have online games, that becomes more of a challenge, where you need to preserve the whole sort of server infrastructure and things like that. What I would think from the hardware point of view, the reassurance is that actually emulation isn't going to go away. On future devices, you should still be able to emulate what current devices do, largely. And if you think back to the films from the sort of turn of the previous century, when it was absolutely in its infancy, and all the cameras were different and the way they did the filming was different. It's only till much more recently that we've had ways of encoding those so that you can play them at the different frame rates they had and all that sort of thing. So we might go through a period where people can't appreciate what people have created until some new technology comes along that makes emulation of it possible. I think it's a very good point, though. You know, how do we capture the feeling, the stories of the time?
And another this short question: what will be next with Raspberry Pi and Raspberry Pi?
Well, we launched the Raspberry Pi 3 not that long ago. I don't think it takes a genius to work out what comes after Raspberry Pi 2, and Raspberry Pi 3. But taking a step back, I'm very, very proud of what we've done at Raspberry Pi. And what we've tended to do is, roughly speaking, keep the same sort of price point, and you gradually get more and more for your money. But we've also, with introducing the Raspberry Pi Zero as well, we've shown what we can do, how cheaply we can make the original hardware. Because that has different set of uses, where people want something that is just unbelievably cheap. I think we were the first people to give away a computer on the front cover of a magazine, which to me, I remember lots of magazines having 3.5-inch floppy disks on the cover. That we've actually managed to hit the price point where we can afford to give it away. And even to buy them, they're only about £4. Raspberry Pi Zero, I mean. And they're still selling out as fast as we can make them. And I think the wider point, though, is what next is to make the software better, make it easier for teachers, to make it easier to learn with it, and all of those things are already happening. We've sold more than 8 million of them now, and they're selling very, very well. I think the key point is we're seeing more and more going into schools, because I think in the very early days of Raspberry Pi, a lot of the hardware was bought by hobbyists wanting to do things, whether it was, I don't know, turn the lights on in their garden or some watering their plants sort of thing, where a lot of it was adults doing it, even though they might have been doing it with their kids. Nowadays we're seeing a lot more kid-led projects in schools and directly, because we're putting out, there's a lot of literature, how to learn on the Raspberry Pi. The software is now a lot easier. It's still not easy, it's just easier than it was, and I'm hoping it will continue to get easier as we spend more money on making it better.
I will finish with one question that comes from Evelyn. She says, you've done a lot, therefore, where do you get the inspiration from now?
There are so many more things that we want to do. that we're not short of inspiration. I mean, Frontier is a team of more than 300 people. And so a lot of them are young, a lot of them have their own inspirations. And so we listen to people and people work together. It's got to be something that we all want to do. The opportunities to do things are more now than they ever were. So it's a case of trying to pare down and work out the one that we really want to do. And the one, I said right at the start, you should follow your dream. The one where we can see that there's a great opportunity, and what's more, that there's nothing out there like what we're about to do, or there's a gap, if you like.
Well, thank you very much. I believe that we all will try to follow our dreams from day one, which might be today. And I just want to thank everyone who has been here listening to everything so interesting that David has been saying, everyone that sent me the questions, everyone that asked it today, because I think that we got a lot, really a lot from many dimensions. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.